What's up, hobby friends? My name is Casey and welcome to another miniature rescue. This week I want to talk about going into a miniature painting competition with an eBay miniature. This video has been sponsored by Fume, but more on that in a little bit. Last year at Adepticon 2023 was my first time entering into a legitimate painting competition. The goal was pretty straightforward and not what you may think. It was just to enter, to get a mini in the case and hopefully not make a fool of myself. I wanted to commit to painting a model and being judged by and against much better painters than I am. Getting feedback and applying it is generally the best approach to getting better at something. So I nailed the goal. The mini went into the case, I got feedback from a few very good painters, and ended up getting through the first round of cuts with my model. That was almost 9 months ago, and I have tried to apply the things I learned from that experience this year. In a lot of ways, most of the videos I have made since then have explored that in one way or another. Either taking the time to mask things off and really get a nice result with an airbrush layer, or convert something to a higher level than I normally would, or take on freehand in much more complicated ways. All while working with eBay minis that needed a little bit of help to look their best. Adepticon 2024 is coming up sooner than most of us realize, and it seems to me that the holiday season is a great time to take a bit of a break, so to speak, and work on projects for either Golden Demon 2024 or Resin Beast. Honestly, both. I'm gonna do both. I want to experience what it's like to be in both and get feedback on as much of my painting as I can while literally being surrounded by the best painters in the world. It's just too good of an opportunity not to take advantage of. The way I want to approach it this year is by taking a look at the minis that I've really enjoyed painting throughout the last year, and where I've started to push myself in the hobby. I could take a model that's already been started and take even more time refining it and making it the best I possibly can. Or I could pick something that I liked a certain aspect of and try and push that even more to get an even better looking version of that thing. If any of that makes sense. The point is picking a model that offers something for me to get better at. If I want to paint skin better going forward, then pick a model with basically no clothes on. I want to paint the color black better, so pick a model that typically has black armor. Alternatively, I could pick something I'm rather comfortable with. I really like painting orcs and green skin, so that could easily be something that I could shoot for. But really, my goals are to improve and to get feedback in order to do so. I feel like competitive painting is more about pushing yourself and seeing what you can do more than being the best. Painting is so subjective that it's hard to even make that distinction when there are so many good painters out there. So instead of competing against other people, I want to compete against myself and improve as much as I possibly can from the last time I had a model in the case. After a good amount of thought, I decided to paint a model that I've really enjoyed for a long time. Something that offers a good amount of difficulty, but that I know will be fun to paint for a longer period of time. I picked up this Black Templar Emperor's Champion off of eBay and plan on using it for Golden Demon this year. I bought this specific one because the paint on the model looks like contrast paint, and I know that comes off pretty easy without pretty much any issue in a sonic cleaner. And I really enjoyed converting and painting that old Stormcast model into a Black Templar. The colors for the shoulder pads and the cloth with the black armor were just nice to paint. And I have a look in mind for this guy that makes me want to get to work and start painting. But before that, let me tell you about today's excellent sponsor. Cold turkey may be great on sandwiches, but there's a better way to break your bad habits. We're not talking about using some magic liquid that makes you a world-class painter. Looking at you, Noam Oil. We're talking about our sponsor, Fume, and they look at the problem in a different way. Not everything in a bad habit is wrong. So instead of a drastic, uncomfortable change, why not just remove the bad from your habit? Fume is an innovative, award-winning flavored air device that does just that. Instead of electronics, Fume is completely natural. Instead of vapor, Fume uses flavored air. And instead of harmful chemicals, Fume uses all natural, delicious flavors. You get it. Instead of bad, Fume is good. It's a habit you're free to enjoy and make replacing your bad habit easy. It fills the void in a natural, guilt-free way. Your Fume comes with an adjustable airflow dial and is designed with movable parts and magnets for fidgeting, giving your fingers a lot to do, which is helpful for de-stressing while breaking your habit. Personally, I was surprised by how much the clicking and spinning and popping of the metal parts actually helped me calm down and focus on what I was doing, and not on the bad habit. Stopping is something we all put off because it's hard, but switching to Fume is easy, enjoyable, and even fun. Fume has served over 150,000 customers and has thousands of success stories, and there's no reason that can't be you. Join Fume in accelerating humanity's breakup from destructive habits by picking up the Journey Pack today. Head to tryfume.com/ebayminiature or scan the QR code and use code ebayminiature to get 10% off when you get the Journey Pack today. The Fume Solano launched last November 6th. You can upgrade your Journey Pack to the Solano to enjoy the premium walnut barrel and onyx black coated mouthpiece that has a smoother finish, and still get 10% off. That's tryfum.com and use code ebayminiature to save an additional 10% off your order today. A huge thank you to Fume for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to painting that sweet, sweet mini. One of my goals will be to make a scenic base for this model, something I've sort of done with other models, but never really pushed myself to get better at. Last year, I made a pretty nice base for my Golden Demon entry, and I got some good feedback on it, but the incorporation of the model felt a little lacking. So I want to make a cool base, but also make sure that the model looks like it belongs in that environment. For that, I have ordered two kinds of bases. One is a square plinth with a background on it, and the other is a regular circle. Not actually sure which one to use yet. Another piece of feedback that I got was the base I went with, the plinth, if you could call it that, was not doing me any favors with the mini. That makes a lot of sense in hindsight. The light color of the wood takes contrast away from the snow and the model, and the fact that it's wood is saying something that I don't think is relevant to the model or the scene. So a standard black plinth makes the most sense. That's basically what everybody else uses, and I can see why. It just works. Kinda like painting your base rims black, just makes the model look better. So the Black Templar Mini gets a bath in the Sonic Cleaner, and then we move on to the cleanup process. Alright, let's start fixing up the Emperor's Champion by scraping away any mold lines, sanding them down, and cutting away some of the weird bits of glue on the model. Overall, the construction was pretty well done. Only a couple of mold lines were left over. There were a couple of weird excess glue spots on the model though, so I sanded those down and was able to cut away the glue without pretty much any issues. I made sure that I wasn't being too aggressive with the mold line removal because I didn't want to have any weird lines or scrapes in the plastic once the paint went down. So a little bit of sanding with a high grit sanding stick ensures a smooth finish on the plastic. There is a small issue with the sword of this mini. It's got some pieces cut into it, and that won't be going anywhere. So my plan with that is to even it out a little bit on the other side, and eventually we will paint some damage to match that removed plastic. Making the weirdness of a used mini part of the story is most of the fun here, because realistically, I could just go out and buy this model new and put it together. But that's not really in the spirit of this channel, so we're not going to be doing that. Alright, now on to the painting. The biggest part of this Black Templar model will probably be the armor. Black armor is something that I want to keep working on and hone in on what I want to use as my go-to for painting it. I'll start by getting an overall black on the model, apart from the primer, just in case I need to touch up the darkest parts of the model at any point. Then I'll start to lighten up the armor with some bluish black and gray. The idea will be to keep all of the armor super matte and dry. I want the armor to look almost textured and dark, with a contrasting color for the weathering. I did something similar to the Black Templar conversion I made a while back, but I want to take that a step further and see what we can do with it. After getting a nice bit of layering, I come back in with some very thinned down black ink to start to deepen the shadows of the model. I'm going to end up coming back in with the same type of mixture to blend a lot of the armor. So there's a ton of back and forth, highlighting and taking it down, but it gives the armor more depth and color. My biggest goal here will be to try and keep everything small and more to scale with the model. So the texture will be smaller than normal, weathering will be more subtle, and everything will need to be shown on the model as if it were true to life scale. Hopefully that'll come across and you can see what I mean as we add more paint to the mini. Next I want to start working on the sword. It's a huge part of the model and it's just staring at me. So let's try a few things and see what direction works for the model. I wanted to start with a traditional power sword look, and that did work out for the most part, shooting white ink on either side of the sword to bring in those bright spots and filtering some achromatic blue contrast over the top. It looks pretty cool, and I kept it this way for a while, but eventually we're gonna have to come back and completely change it. I realized later on that it just didn't work with the model and I couldn't keep it, but here's the process that I take to get there either way. Part of the process on the sword included using white oil paint to get those runes to really shine. I wanted to have them stand off the sword and be easy to read, and the white oil paint is perfect to get right into the cracks and brighten them up. So I got that paint into the letters, but then I also let it run into a lot of the creases and cracks in the model so I could use some paint over the top of that would brighten up a lot right next to the black. Using a thinned down orangey brown, I'm going to begin that weathering process. I want this color in all of the cracks and near the bottom of each piece of armor. Using this as a kind of dry texture on the armor, letting it coffee stain a little bit so we can get different striations and movement. This color contrasts nicely with the blue that we put into the armor as well. So it has this kind of nice cold and warm feel that I really like. Lots and lots of layers of glazing will be done to build up that color. Initially, it's a bit more of an all-over coating, but throughout the entire time I was painting, I kept going back to add more layers to this color. So it changes little by little throughout the entire video. You can kind of see that saturation start to build. Since I was working with that brown, I decided to go a step darker and bring out the base color for the leather on the model. I want to get this started so we have a little bit more of the model base coated. Did the same thing with the cloth using a less thinned down version of that white oil paint, which makes it easier to fill in with a lighter color later. I ended up starting a fiery glow on the sword, and that's about when I realized it wasn't going to work for the model. I was thinking back to the model I took last year and how one of the biggest takeaways I had was how the armor was mismatched. There were super rusty parts and super clean parts for seemingly reasons unknown. So I decided to fully abandon the idea of a magical sword altogether and just work on the armor more while I tried to decide what to do with it. Some bright silver will be the main way to bring out the small details on the armor. It can barely be dotted onto bolts and edges to create a shiny piece of the armor, and separates panels with weathering that doubles as edge highlighting. The more I put paint on this guy, the more I want it to feel like he's just been out fighting with little to no rest, barely held together, just trying to make it through to the next day. He's supposed to be the Emperor's champion, so I feel like where he would have been pristine at the start, he would also be the one to never give up and just fight through whatever he had to. So scratching on the armor and little bits of damage are all gonna happen, as well as general buildup of dirt and grime from not getting back to base often enough. My goal for the chipping and edge highlighting will be to maintain as small of a line as possible. This aluminum paint is very bright and it can be overwhelming if you put too much on, so I want to keep it small and more believable to the scale. For this, I am employing magnifying glasses, some dentist loupes to be precise, and I mean in both terminology and painting. These things get right up next to the model, and it makes it pretty easy to see where your brush is landing. I used this for almost the entire painting process on this model, and it helped so much in keeping that scale as small as I could. I could see exactly where I was landing on the model and how much paint was being applied. Very handy if you can find an inexpensive pair for sure. The weird thing about using magnifiers though is that it doesn't always let you see the context of what you're painting. Like, you can see everything really well in a small space, but not how that makes the model look overall. I would paint a small section thinking I've nailed this, and then looking at it normally and realize that you couldn't even see what I just did. Either not being a bright enough color or details so small that you literally have to magnify it to see it. It makes sense, but it wasn't something I fully anticipated when I started using the glasses. Either way, I think they are worth using and getting more used to, because the accuracy you gain is pretty incredible. After doing quite a bit of up-close work on the armor, I decided to tackle that sword again, so I covered it in a very dark metallic paint as a base coat. Then I came in with some brown, purple, and blue ink to lay down a bit of heat to the blade. If I end up adding in that flaming text, then it will make sense to get some heat stress in the metal. And even if I don't, it has a nice reflective beaten down look to it that I like a lot more than the bright power sword, at least with everything else on the model. So there are options, and that's a good place to be in right now. Now that we have that going for us, it's time to start working on what I feel is probably the hardest part of the model. The white parts of Black Templar models tend to be the hardest. Not that they have to be, but the way that I look at it is you either focus on the black or the white when it comes to airbrushing when you start the model. I usually pick before starting the model, and since black is kind of the thing that makes these models what they are, being in the name and all, I went that route to start with. That doesn't mean you can't use the airbrush and, some masking to take care of those other areas, but it does make it a little more difficult. I covered the cloth with white oil paint, and that helped quite a bit up front. I also did that for the pauldrons, although with the backpack removed, it's not terribly hard to bring in some silly putty to mask those off for the airbrush. The cloth gets a coat of khaki to start, and I give that as much time to dry as possible before moving up in value. I don't want to ruin that paint by trying to paint over it before it's actually dry. Lighter colors get torn up really quickly, and that entire section could just be ruined. So I moved on to the shoulders and got out the silly putty. The workup's pretty straightforward. Khaki to start, a bone color for the mid-tone, and a kind of ivory for the highlight. I still want that micro texture in the cloth and on the pauldron, so I dump out the airbrush cup onto my palette to save for later. Something you can do to save a little paint and keep specific mixes around for touch-ups later if need be. I think this is probably a good time as any to mention that I've been using the Squidmar Hard-Earned Steenback Evolution for this model. Honestly, it's a great feeling airbrush that gives you a ton of control. It shoots really well even at low pressure, and you can see how nice and tight the spray is for taking care of this small spot that I missed on the top of the shoulder pad. This is an off-white color too, and with a little mixing and a low pressure, it still goes on really smooth. You can't even tell that I missed it. After getting a dark metallic onto the trim and on the chapter marking, I can come in with some burnt umber ink and orange-brown paint to start that weathering. The burnt umber in particular looks really nice on the ivory and gives it that kind of old stained treasure map look that just feels right. There was a ton of back and forth with the ink and the three colors I used through the airbrush, but a little give and take with the coffee staining and giving a little more definition to a lot of those lines with the brighter colors worked out, and I really like how these turned out. Now that those are in a good place, I needed to touch up that little shield on his chest since I hit it with some of that white paint. I wanted to do a bit of freehand on this as well as bringing in another color. So I started by covering it with a dark red, and after doing that I kind of thought it was a bit too much, so I went back over it with the dark silver and ended up writing in little words with that same dark red. All of that gets weathered down with those browns and chipped up with the bright aluminum, the same as everything else, and results feel really in scale and appropriate for this model. I spent a ton of time on this model and it's still not done. I'm trying to put more effort into it than normal because it's a competition. Normally I spend, maybe 2 or 3 hours on a model for this channel. The turnaround is pretty quick with most of these simply because of the nature of making everything into a video. So I don't generally get to spend the kind of time I would want to on any given model. Occasionally I do, and I basically never regret it. So I'm continuing a theme that I started not too long ago, and I'm going to listen to myself and give this mini more time. There might be another video going into some of the finishing details and how things went, but Adepticon 2024 is still a few months away. I wanted to share what I'm working with you all in the hopes that it inspires you to find a model that you enjoy and just get it in the case this year. If you're already going to Adepticon this upcoming year, then you might as well bring a mini to put in the case. You can be part of the conversation. You can go see your mini under the lights and enjoy the walk around the cases from a different perspective. You also get to talk to a bunch of people who are in the same hobby and ask their genuine opinions on a model that you've painted. Last year, I spent about 8 hours painting a model for Golden Demon, which is not very much. This year, I plan on spending even more to really see how far I can take this. I also have plans for Resin Beast that I didn't even get to in this video, and that's super exciting as well, but that's definitely for another time. Until then, thank you for joining me on another miniature rescue. If you like something about this video, please consider hitting that like button, sharing this video with your hobby friends, and of course, subscribing for more miniature rescues. Once again, I'm Casey, and I will see you in the next video. And finally, here is the work in progress of my Black Templar Emperor's Champion. Thanks again.